Sometimes a single moment can change everything. One night, one conversation, one cruel decision that seems so small at the time. This is a story about that kind of moment. A story about two women whose lives collided at a charity gala in Philadelphia and how that collision changed both of their lives forever. But before we get to that night, let me paint you a picture of two very different worlds. Picture this: the grand ballroom of Philadelphia's most exclusive hotel. Crystal chandeliers hang from ceilings so high they seem to touch the sky. Imported roses, flown in from Ecuador that very morning. A week or rare morning, sit in crystal vases on every table. A string quartet plays softly in the corner, the kind of music that whispers old money and refinement. The champagne flows freely, each bottle costing more than most people spend on groceries in a month. This is where Elena Morrison belonged, or at least where she believed she belonged. Elena was the kind of woman who turned heads when she entered a room, not because of who she was, but because of what she wore, what she owned, who she married. That night, her designer gown probably cost more than most families earn in 6 months. Her jewelry? Let's not even go there. She moved through that ballroom like a queen surveying her kingdom, air-kissing friends, laughing at jokes that weren't funny, playing the role she'd been born to play. Her husband, Christopher Morrison, had built a commercial real estate empire from the ground up. He was self-made, a man who understood the value of hard work. But Elena had been born into wealth, married into more wealth, and never once questioned whether she deserved any of it. In her mind, the world was divided into two types of people, people like her and people who served people like her. She had never worked a day in her life, not really. Oh, she volunteered at charity functions, lending her name to causes, organizing galas, sitting on boards. But actual work, the kind that makes your feet ache and your back hurt, the kind where you can't pay your rent if you miss a shift. Elena Morrison had no idea what that felt like, and she liked it that way. Now let me tell you about Maya Coleman, 24 years old, moving through that same ballroom in a crisp white uniform, carrying trays with the kind of grace that comes from years of practice. On the surface, she was just another server, one of dozens hired for the evening to make sure the wealthy guests never had to reach for their own champagne. But Maya Coleman was so much more than that. She was a Harvard MBA candidate. Let that sink in for a moment. Harvard, one of the most prestigious universities in the world. She was writing her thesis on systemic discrimination in corporate environments, how prejudice affects professional opportunities for minorities. She was brilliant, driven, and determined to make a difference in the world. But that night, she was also broke. Maya had grown up on the south side of Chicago, raised by a single mother who worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. 3 jobs. Can you imagine? Her mother would leave before sunrise and come home after midnight and still find time to help Maya with her homework, to tell her she could be anything she wanted to be. By the time Maya was 16, she was managing the family finances. She took their modest savings and invested them so carefully, so smartly, that she created a fund that paid for her 2 younger siblings to go to college. 16 years old, and she was already changing lives. She had graduated summa cum laude, that means top of her class, in economics. She'd earned a scholarship to study in Lyon, France for 2 years, where she'd learned to speak French like a native. She'd worked her way through every obstacle life threw at her, and she'd done it with dignity and grace. But Harvard is expensive. Even with scholarships, even with financial aid, there were bills to pay. Her family still needed help. So Maya worked extra shifts as a server at high-end events, swallowing her pride, putting on that uniform, serving people who would never see her as their equal. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself it was just until graduation. She told herself that every tray she carried was one step closer to her dreams. That night, Maya's world and Elena's world were about to collide in a way that neither of them could have predicted. It started so simply, so casually, the kind of cruelty that people like Elena probably didn't even think twice about. Maya was passing Elena's table, carrying a tray of champagne flutes. She was being careful. She was always careful. But Elena reached out, and whether it was truly an accident or something more deliberate, a glass of red wine tumbled from the table. The crimson liquid splashed across Maya's white uniform like blood on snow. It spread across her skirt, staining the fabric. Impossible to ignore. For just a moment, the room seemed to freeze. Maya looked down at the stain. Elena looked at Maya, and then Elena smiled. Not a kind smile, not an apologetic smile. A smile that said, "I know exactly what I just did." "Oh my," Elena said, her voice dripping with false concern. She said it loud enough for the nearby tables to hear, loud enough to make sure everyone was paying attention. "How clumsy of you." Clumsy, of you. Let those words sink in for a moment. Elena had knocked over the wine, but somehow in her twisted logic it was Maya's fault for being in the wrong place, for being the kind of person who shouldn't be at an event like this. "I suppose it's what happens," Elena continued, her voice getting louder, "when they hire certain types for prestigious events like this. People who don't naturally understand how to move in refined society. Certain types. We all know what that means, don't we?" Elena wasn't talking about servers. She wasn't talking about young people or part-time workers. She was talking about race. She was talking about the color of Maya's skin, and she wanted everyone to know it. Maya felt every eye in that section of the ballroom turn toward her. She felt the weight of their stares, their judgment, their curiosity. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked away. But some, and this is the part that hurts, some looked entertained. Like this was dinner theater. Like Maya's humiliation was part of the evening's entertainment. But here's what Elena didn't know about Maya Coleman. Maya had grown up navigating discrimination. She'd faced it in schools, in homes, in stores, on streets. She'd learned early that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay calm. Stay dignified. Don't give them the reaction they're looking for. So Maya knelt down, her stained uniform pressing against her legs, and began picking up the shards of broken glass. Her hands didn't shake. Her voice didn't waver. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she said quietly. "I'll have this cleaned up right away." Inside, her heart was pounding. Inside, she felt the familiar sting of injustice, the anger that comes from being judged for something you can't control. But outside? Outside, she was grace personified, and that seemed to make Elena even angrier. You see, people like Elena want a reaction. They want tears, anger, shouting, something they can point to and say, "See, I was right about her." But Maya gave her nothing, just professionalism, just dignity. So Elena decided to escalate. As Maya headed to the kitchen to change her uniform and clean up, Elena turned to her circle of wealthy friends. Women in designer gowns and expensive jewelry. Women who had never worried about making rent or feeding their children or choosing between medicine and groceries. "Did you see that?" Elena said, her voice theatrical, her hands gesturing dramatically. "The audacity of some people to think they can just infiltrate our events." Clearly, someone in the organization did not screen the staff properly. Catherine Pemberton, a pharmaceutical heiress who'd inherited her wealth and her attitude, nodded eagerly. "Darling, you're absolutely right. Just yesterday, I had to dismiss a maid because she had the audacity to question my cleaning methods. These people need to understand boundaries. These people." There it was again. That phrase that really means people who aren't like us, people we consider beneath us. The group grew larger. Other wealthy women joined the conversation, each one adding their own story of dealing with difficult staff, inappropriate behavior, people who don't know their place. They talked about Maya as if she weren't a person, as if she were a problem to be solved, a mistake to be corrected. When Maya returned from the kitchen wearing a clean uniform, her head still held high, she could feel their eyes on her. She could hear snippets of their conversation, deliberately loud enough for her to overhear. Of course she came back. She probably needs this job desperately. Imagine if it were one of our daughters being forced to work like this. At least she knows her place and didn't try to talk back. Every word was a calculated cruelty. Every comment designed to remind Maya that in their world, she would never be equal. She would always be less than. But what none of them knew, what Elena especially didn't know, was that Maya had come prepared. Hidden discreetly in her uniform pocket was a small digital recorder. For her thesis research, she'd been documenting instances of racial discrimination in corporate and social environments. Every venomous word, every cruel comment, every dismissive laugh, it was all being recorded in crystal clear audio. Maya had learned something important in her years of studying discrimination. The most powerful weapon against prejudice isn't anger, it's documentation, it's evidence, it's letting people's own words speak for themselves. Still, Elena wasn't satisfied. Maya's calm demeanor, her professional composure, it was eating at Elena. She wanted to break this young woman. She wanted to put her firmly in what Elena considered her proper place. So she decided on one final public humiliation. Maya was replacing glasses on a nearby table when Elena's voice rang out across the section of the ballroom. "Excuse me, dear," Elena called out, her tone dripping with condescension. Maya turned, already knowing that whatever came next wouldn't be good. "You understand that workers should remain discreet during events, don't you?" Elena said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Avoid drawing unnecessary attention to themselves?" "Yes, ma'am," Maya replied, her voice steady. "I understand perfectly." Something in Maya's tone, the articulation, the confidence, the way she maintained direct eye contact, seemed to irritate Elena even more. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. Maya was supposed to be intimidated, flustered, ashamed. Elena stood up, approaching Maya with a smile that had nothing kind in it. "In fact," Elena said, "perhaps we should have a quick chat about proper protocol." She paused, letting the moment build. "You can read, can't you?" The question hung in the air like poison gum. Around them, conversation stopped. People turned to watch. This was the kind of moment that would be remembered, talked about, shared in whispers later. It was a calculated insult designed to humiliate. The implication was clear. Elena assumed that this young black server was probably illiterate or poorly educated. She was playing to stereotypes as old as they were ugly. "Yes, ma'am," Maya said quietly. "I read perfectly well." Elena's smile widened. "Wonderful. Then perhaps you can do us all a favor." She picked up the elegant menu from her table, the one listing the evening's courses in elaborate French. "Read this for us, out loud, so we can be sure that the service staff understands exactly what is being served to our important guests." This was Elena's masterstroke, or at least she thought it was. The menu was entirely in French, sophisticated culinary terms that even many educated Americans would struggle with. Elena was setting Maya up for public failure, expecting her to stumble over unfamiliar words, to expose what Elena assumed was a lack of education and sophistication. The women in Elena's circle leaned forward, anticipating the show. Some guests looked uncomfortable, but no one intervened. No one spoke up. They just watched, curious to see how this would play out. Maya took the menu from Elena's outstretched hand. For just a moment, she looked directly into Elena's eyes. And then, for the first time that evening, Maya allowed herself a small smile. "With pleasure, ma'am," she said. And then Maya began to read. "Amuse-bouche de foie gras avec gelée de champagne." The words flowed from her lips like music. Not hesitantly, not with the awkward pronunciation of someone reading a foreign language phonetically, but with perfect, flawless French accent, the kind that native speakers spend years perfecting. "Suivi par le potage parmentier aux truffes noires du Périgord." Elena's smile began to falter. Around the table, her friends exchanged confused glances. This wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. Maya continued, her voice clear and confident, pronouncing each sophisticated culinary term with the ease of someone who'd lived in France, who'd studied the language, who'd walked the streets of Lyon and ordered from menus just like this one. "Le plat principal, magret de canard rôti avec son jus aux cerises, accompagné de légumes de saison et gratin dauphinois." By now, people from other tables were watching. The string quartet had finished their piece, and in the relative quiet, Maya's perfect French carried across the ballroom. Elena's face had gone from smug satisfaction to pale shock. Catherine Pemberton's mouth hung slightly open. The entire circle of wealthy women who had been so eager to participate in Maya's humiliation now sat in stunned silence. "Et pour terminer," Maya finished, her voice steady and strong. "Le soufflé au grand marnier accompagné d'une sauce anglaise à la vanille barbacoa de Madagascar." She handed the menu back to Elena with the same serene smile. "I hope that was helpful, ma'am." The silence that followed was deafening. No one knew what to say. Elena stood frozen, holding the menu, completely speechless, for the first time that evening. Her carefully orchestrated humiliation had backfired spectacularly. This simple waitress had just demonstrated a level of education and sophistication that rivaled, no, exceeded anyone in that room. From across the ballroom, Christopher Morrison had been watching the entire scene. 23 years of marriage had shown him many sides of his wife, but he'd never seen her be quite so openly, deliberately cruel. And watching this young woman handle that cruelty with such dignity, such grace, such unexpected brilliance, it stirred something in him. Shame, anger, and something else. Respect. He rose from his seat and walked slowly toward the group. When he reached them, his eyes met Maya's for just a brief moment. In that glance, she saw something she hadn't expected. Genuine respect from a man who clearly understood what he'd just witnessed. "Victoria," he said softly to his wife. But his voice carried a warning that Elena immediately recognized. "Perhaps it's time we focus on the real purpose of this evening. Charity." It was a subtle rebuke, but everyone heard it. Elena's face flushed. She knew she'd lost control of the situation. She tried to smile, tried to laugh it off, but everyone could see the cracks in her facade. "Of course, dear," she said, her voice tight. "I was just trying to ensure everyone understood proper protocols." Maya nodded respectfully and began to step away, but she could feel the weight of what had just happened. She'd won this battle, but she knew from experience that people like Elena didn't forget moments like this. They didn't forgive being shown up, being proven wrong, being embarrassed in front of their peers. As Maya made her way back toward the kitchen, she discreetly checked the recorder in her pocket. Still running, still capturing everything. 23 minutes of audio, 23 minutes of explicit racial discrimination, cruel assumptions, deliberate humiliation, and one spectacular backfire. For her thesis, this was invaluable research. For her own dignity, it was vindication. But Maya had a feeling, a deep, instinctive feeling, that this recording was going to become something much bigger than academic research. She just didn't know yet how much bigger. What Maya couldn't have seen was Christopher Morrison's face as he watched her walk away. The wheels in his mind were turning. This young woman, whoever she really was, had handled his wife's cruelty with more grace and intelligence than he'd seen in years. And he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just witnessed something important, something that was going to change everything. The night was far from over, but the story, the real story, was just beginning. You know what they say about karma? Sometimes it takes its time. Sometimes it waits for just the right moment. But when it arrives, oh, when it arrives, it's devastating and beautiful all at once. Let me tell you what happened after that night at the gala, because the story you heard in Chapter 1, that was just the beginning. Later that evening, after the French menu incident, Maya found herself in the hotel's elegant bathroom, finally allowing her hands to shake. Not from fear, never from fear, but from that controlled adrenaline that comes when you've stood your ground and won. She pulled out her small digital recorder and checked the audio quality. Crystal clear. 23 minutes of the most explicit racial discrimination she'd ever documented for her thesis. Every cruel word, every dismissive comment, every assumption based solely on the color of her skin. She was staring at her reflection in the gilded mirror, collecting herself, when she heard a soft knock on the bathroom door. "Maya," a gentle voice called out. "Are you okay?" She recognized that voice immediately. Christopher Morrison, Elena's husband, the man who had been watching from the head table. Maya hesitated. She'd learned to be cautious around wealthy white men who suddenly showed interest after witnessing discrimination. Sometimes their concern was genuine. Often it was about easing their own guilt. But something in his tone made her open the door. Christopher stood in the hallway alone. His hands were clasped together and his entire posture radiated genuine discomfort. Not the discomfort of being caught, but the discomfort of being ashamed. "I apologize," he said immediately, "for my wife's utterly unacceptable behavior. There is no justification for what I witnessed tonight." Maya studied him carefully. 24 years of life had taught her to read people quickly, to distinguish real remorse from performative guilt. In Christopher's eyes, she saw something rare, genuine shame and anger directed at his own family. Mr. Morrison, Maya replied carefully, I appreciate your concern, but you need not feel responsible for your wife's actions. Of course I do, Christopher said firmly. 23 years of marriage have given me many opportunities to correct behavior like this, and I have failed miserably. He paused, then asked, Maya, may I ask you a direct question? She nodded, curious where this was going. You're not really a waitress, are you? Maya couldn't help but smile slightly. What makes you think that? Your French is better than anyone else's in that room, including French professors I know personally, Christopher said. Your posture, your articulation, the way you maintained your dignity under attack. He trailed off. Besides, I recognize intelligence when I see it. I've built my career on reading people. For a moment, Maya considered deflecting, but something about Christopher's genuine interest, his respect, not pity, made her tell the truth. I'm an MBA student at Harvard, she admitted. I work as a waitress to help my family and finish my studies. Christopher closed his eyes, and Maya could see the wave of emotion cross his face. Horror, shame, anger. Harvard, he said quietly. My God, Maya. My wife just publicly attacked a Harvard student out of pure racial prejudice. Mr. Morrison, this happens more often than you realize. Your wife simply verbalized what many people think silently. That doesn't make it acceptable, Christopher said, his voice heavy with emotion. In fact, it makes it much worse. He paused. May I ask what your area of expertise is at Harvard? Analysis of systemic discrimination in corporate environments, Maya replied. I'm finishing a thesis on how prejudice affects professional opportunities for minorities. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Christopher was silent for a long moment, and Maya could almost see him processing, calculating, making connections. When he spoke again, his voice was different, more businesslike, more purposeful. Maya, may I make a proposal that might sound strange? 15 minutes later, they were sitting in a quiet corner of the hotel lobby, away from the Gala, away from prying eyes. Christopher had ordered 2 coffees and was speaking in low, urgent tones. My company, Morrison Commercial Properties, has been facing serious diversity issues, he explained. The board has been pushing for real change, not just cosmetic adjustments, but fundamental transformation. Especially after some recent incidents that made it clear we have deep systemic problems. Maya listened intently, her academic instincts cataloging every word, every nuance. I need someone with your expertise to conduct a thorough audit of our hiring practices, our promotions, our entire corporate culture, Christopher continued. Someone who understands both the theory and the reality of discrimination in the workplace. Someone who won't pull punches or tell me what I want to hear. He slid a business card across the table. External consulting position. Payment in line with market standards for specialists of your caliber. You would retain complete autonomy over your methods and conclusions. No interference from me, no pressure to soften your findings. Maya picked up the card, feeling the weight of possibility in her hands. Mr. Morrison, that's very generous, but I have to ask, why are you doing this? Christopher met her eyes directly. Because I spent 23 years living with a woman whose prejudices I silently tolerated. Because I built a company that probably replicates the same systemic problems you study. And because, frankly, after what I witnessed tonight, I need to do something meaningful to repair the damage my family causes in the world. Before Maya could respond, a sharp voice cut through the lobby. Robert, dear, I was looking for you. Elena Morrison appeared, her face a carefully constructed mask of concern. But when she saw her husband sitting with Maya, that mask cracked. Her expression transformed into barely concealed fury. What are you doing here with her? Elena asked, the last word dripping with venom. Christopher didn't flinch. Victoria, I'm offering Maya a position as a diversity consultant at the company. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. Elena looked between her husband and Maya as if she'd just witnessed the ultimate betrayal. Her mouth opened and closed several times before she could form words. You're joking, right? She laughed, but the sin came out high-pitched and nervous. Robert, she's a waitress. She's an MBA student at Harvard, Christopher corrected calmly. specializing in exactly the area where our company needs help. Elena visibly paled. Harvard? Yes, Victoria. The woman you publicly humiliated tonight is a highly qualified academic who's working here to help her family. Maya watched the dynamics between the couple with clinical interest. Elena was in shock. But she was also calculating, trying desperately to figure out how to minimize the damage to her reputation. Well, Robert, Elena said carefully, forcing a smile, even if that's true, it doesn't mean we should make rash decisions based on feelings of guilt. It's not guilt, Victoria. It's recognition of competence and genuine business necessity. Elena turned to Maya directly, her voice taking on a false sweetness that was almost worse than her earlier cruelty. Darling, I'm sure you understand that sometimes misunderstandings happen at social events. Perhaps we should all just forget about tonight's minor disagreements. Minor disagreements. She was trying to rewrite history right before their eyes, to transform deliberate cruelty into an innocent mistake. Maya's voice was calm, almost gentle, but her words were steel. Miss Morrison, there was no misunderstanding. Your comments were very clear and direct. Elena's smile tightened. Of course, dear, but intelligent people like you surely understand that sometimes social context can be complicated. Actually, Maya replied, people with my academic background tend to be very precise about context and meaning, especially when it comes to documented racial discrimination. That single word, documented, hit Elena like a physical blow. Her eyes widened. Her face went pale. Documented? She whispered. Christopher looked at his wife, and understanding dawned on his face. Victoria, were you recorded? Maya neither confirmed nor denied it, but her eloquent silence said everything. Elena's hands began to tremble. In that moment, she finally understood. This wasn't just an embarrassing social incident that would be forgotten by morning. This was something much more serious, much more permanent. Christopher stood up, his face a mixture of shame and resolve. Maya, I await your response to the consulting proposal. My assistant will contact you tomorrow with the contract details. As the couple walked away, Maya could hear the beginning of what sounded like a very intense discussion. Elena's voice was rising, defensive, and angry. Christopher's voice was low but firm. Maya sat in that lobby for a long time after they left, holding the business card, thinking about the recorder in her pocket. 23 minutes of audio that could change everything. Not just for her thesis, not just for her career, but potentially for everyone who'd ever been judged, dismissed, or humiliated because of the color of their skin. She'd come to that gala just hoping to make enough money to cover next month's rent. She was leaving with something much more valuable. Evidence, opportunity, and the beginning of justice. Sometimes, Maya thought, the universe works in mysterious ways. Elena Morrison had tried to put her in her place. Instead, she'd given Maya the tools and opportunity to change the entire system. The waitress was about to become the consultant, and when that happened, nothing would ever be the same. 3 weeks passed, 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks where Elena probably thought she'd gotten away with it. 3 weeks where she told herself that the incident at the gala would be forgotten, swept under the rug like so many other moments of casual cruelty. She was wrong. Elena woke up on a Thursday morning with a strange feeling in her stomach. Something wasn't right. She reached for her phone on the nightstand and saw the screen filled with notifications. 47 missed calls, hundreds of unread messages, text messages, voicemails, emails, all flooding in since early morning. Her hands trembling, she opened the first message from Catherine Pemberton. It contained just a link and 3 words. I'm so sorry. Elena clicked the link. The Boston Herald headline screamed at her. Business executive's wife exposed for racial discrimination. Viral audio reveals true face of Philadelphia elite. Below the headline was a photo of her from the gala, frozen in that moment of cruel satisfaction, her expression revealing everything ugly about who she really was. Elena's heart stopped. She scrolled down with shaking hands. The article included the full 23-minute audio recording. Every word she'd said, every cruel comment, every racist assumption, every moment of deliberate humiliation, all of it, crystal clear, available for anyone to hear. And people were listening. Oh, were they listening? The audio was being played on every major radio station in Philadelphia. Morning show hosts were discussing it with outraged commentary. Social media was exploding. The hashtag Elena Exposed was trending nationally. People were sharing the story, commenting, expressing their disgust. Elena ran downstairs, her silk nightgown fluttering behind her perfectly styled hair disheveled for the first time in years. She found Christopher in the kitchen, calmly drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. But the newspaper wasn't his usual financial section. It was open to the same story, the same headline, the same photo of his wife's cruelty. "Robert, you have to do something," Elena cried, waving her phone at him. "And this is a coordinated attack. That waitress is trying to destroy us. You have to make this go away. Sue her. Call our lawyers. Do something." Christopher took a slow sip of his coffee before responding. When he finally looked up at her, his expression was something Elena had never seen before. Cold, distant, final. "Victoria," he said calmly, "that waitress is now our new corporate diversity consultant. And after listening to this audio, I completely understand why our company desperately needs her services." Elena froze. The words didn't make sense. They couldn't make sense. "What did you say?" "Maya started work yesterday," Christopher continued, his voice matter-of-fact. "Her first project is a complete audit of our corporate culture, including analysis of all employees in leadership positions." He finally looked directly at her. "I imagine you understand the implications." Before Elena could process this, her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Patricia Whitmore, chair of the board at the Riverview Tennis Club, where Elena had been a member for 15 years. With shaking hands, Elena answered. "Victoria?" Patricia's voice was ice cold. "The board met in an emergency session this morning. Your membership has been revoked, effective immediately. The behavior demonstrated in that audio recording is completely incompatible with our club's values." "Patricia, please, if you would just let me explain." The line went dead. Patricia had hung up on her. Elena stared at her phone in disbelief. Then it started buzzing again. Notifications. Dozens of them. Hundreds of them. Her WhatsApp group, Ladies Who Lunch, her circle of elite friends, was exploding with messages. But they weren't messages of support. They were messages about her. "I can't believe I've been friends with someone like this for years. My daughter goes to Harvard. I wonder how many young women she's humiliated without us knowing. James told me this morning he's canceling all business with Morrison Commercial Properties. He doesn't want to be associated with this. We need to issue a statement distancing ourselves from Victoria." Elena opened her Instagram account with trembling fingers. She'd had over 12,000 followers yesterday morning, mostly other society women, business contacts, people who admired her lifestyle. Now that number read 9,000. Then, as she watched, it dropped to 8,900, then 8,800. She clicked on her most recent post, a photo from a charity luncheon just days ago, her smiling face surrounded by flowers and champagne. The comments section was a nightmare. "Disgusting racist. How many people did you treat like this when the cameras weren't rolling? I hope you lose everything. Rich people like you think you can get away with anything. Not anymore. Your privilege is showing, and it's ugly." The phone rang again. Margaret Wellington this time, the pharmaceutical heiress who'd been one of her closest friends. "Victoria?" Margaret was crying. "Charles canceled the entire office renovation contract with your husband's company. He said he can't be associated with toxic elements. I'm ruined socially because of my connection to you. People are asking me if I share your views. I can't be seen with you anymore. I'm sorry." One by one, the dominoes fell. The charitable foundation where Elena had served as volunteer vice president for 8 years called. The board had voted unanimously to remove her from all positions, effective immediately. The director's voice was icy. "Frankly, discovering that one of our leaders expressed such blatant discrimination was shocking to everyone. We can't have someone with your values representing our organization." Her hairdresser texted to cancel all future appointments. "Unfortunately, I'm fully booked for the foreseeable future." The spa where she'd had a standing weekly appointment sent an email. We regret to inform you that we're unable to accommodate your membership moving forward. Even her personal shopper at Bergdorf sent a polite but firm message. Given current circumstances, I think it's best if we part ways professionally. In less than 24 hours, Elena's entire social infrastructure had collapsed. Every friendship, every membership, every relationship, every door that had always been open to her, and all of it slammed shut. She collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table, her phone still buzzing with notifications, each one another nail in the coffin of her previous life. You know what the most ironic part is? Christopher said, still calmly drinking his coffee. Maya didn't even have to do anything. She just documented your true nature and let your own words speak for themselves. While Elena sat in her kitchen watching her world crumble, Maya Coleman was walking into Morrison Commercial Properties for her first full week as a diversity consultant. She wore a tailored navy suit that she'd bought secondhand but had altered to fit perfectly. Her natural hair was styled professionally. She carried a leather briefcase, a graduation gift from her mother who'd saved for months to buy it, filled with proposals, research, and a vision for real systemic change. The office building was impressive. 30 floors of glass and steel in downtown Philadelphia. Morrison Commercial Properties occupied the top 5 floors, a testament to Christopher's success in building his real estate empire. As Maya stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor, she saw a conference room filled with the human resources team, department heads, and senior managers. They all turned to look at her as she entered. Christopher stood at the head of the table. "Everyone," he announced, his voice carrying authority and respect, "I'd like you to meet Maya Coleman. Starting today, Maya will be leading our diversity and inclusion initiative. She's an MBA candidate at Harvard, specializing in systemic discrimination in corporate environments. She has full authority to implement necessary changes in our corporate culture, and I expect everyone's complete cooperation." The room broke into respectful applause. Many of them had heard the viral audio. They understood the significance of this moment, that their CEO was taking real action, not just issuing a press release and hoping the problem would go away. Maya stepped forward, and when she spoke, her voice carried the same calm authority she'd maintained through her humiliation. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison, and thank you all for being here." She looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. "I want to be clear about my goals. I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm not here to point fingers or assign blame. I'm here to create an environment where everyone, regardless of their background, their race, their gender, their origin, feels valued, respected, and has equal opportunity to succeed." She clicked a button, and her first PowerPoint slide appeared on the screen. "Over the next 6 months, I'll be conducting a comprehensive audit of our hiring practices, our promotion criteria, our pay structures, and our corporate culture. I'll be interviewing employees at every level, reviewing data, and identifying patterns. Then I'll present my findings and recommendations to implement real, measurable change." Over the following weeks and months, Maya threw herself into the work. She discovered what she'd suspected. Morrison Commercial Properties, like so many companies, had unconscious biases built into every level of operation. She found that resumes with ethnic-sounding names were less likely to get interviews. She discovered that employees of color were promoted more slowly, even with identical qualifications. She identified all-male leadership teams making decisions about policies that affected everyone. But Maya didn't just identify problems. She created solutions. She implemented blind resume screening to eliminate name-based bias. She established mentorship programs pairing senior leaders with promising employees from underrepresented groups. She created transparent promotion criteria and regular pay equity audits. She brought in training, not the superficial diversity workshop kind, but real substantive education about unconscious bias and systemic discrimination. And it worked. Within 3 months, the company was hiring more diverse candidates. Within 6 months, employee satisfaction scores among minorities increased by 40%. Other companies started calling, asking about Morrison's transformation, wanting to implement similar changes. Maya's consulting work grew beyond Morrison Commercial Properties. Other corporations heard about her success and reached out. Soon, she had more clients than she could handle alone. She was no longer just a thesis student. She was becoming a recognized expert in her field. 6 months after that gala night, the contrast between Elena and Maya's lives couldn't have been more stark. Maya woke up in a nicer apartment now, not luxurious but comfortable, with enough space for a home office and bookshelves for her growing collection of reference materials. She'd been promoted to Director of Diversity at Morrison Commercial Properties, with a salary that allowed her to help her family and save for the future. Her phone buzzed with messages, but these were invitations, speaking engagements at conferences, requests for interviews, other companies seeking her consulting services. Her private consulting business was thriving. That morning, she had a particularly special email. Harvard Business Review wanted to publish an article about her work transforming corporate culture at Morrison Commercial Properties. Her story, from humiliated waitress to respected change agent, was inspiring people across the country. Elena, on the other hand, woke up in her mansion, lone, as she had every morning for months. The house that had once been filled with staff, visitors, and the constant hum of social activity was now silent, empty, cold. She'd tried to rebuild her image. She'd posted tearful apologies on social media, talking about learning and growing and becoming better. The comments were brutal. "You're only sorry you got caught." Where was this introspection before you were exposed? Apologies mean nothing without changed behavior. She tried to join new organizations, new clubs, new social circles. Every door closed. The audio recording had become too infamous. Her face, frozen in that moment of cruel satisfaction, had become a symbol, a cautionary tale about privilege and prejudice. Her attempted comeback reached its lowest point when she tried to volunteer at a community center, hoping to rehabilitate her image through service. The director, a young black woman who recognized Elena immediately, politely but firmly declined her offer. "Ms. Morrison, I appreciate the gesture, but the people we serve have experienced enough discrimination in their lives. They don't need someone with your history working here." Christopher had indeed filed for divorce. The proceedings had been mercifully quick. The house was hers, but their shared assets had been divided. Christopher had been generous in the settlement, more generous than Elena deserved, perhaps, but it came with a condition. Elena had to complete a year-long program on racial sensitivity and implicit bias, with proof of completion and genuine engagement. It was the ultimate irony. The woman who'd mocked others for their supposed lack of education was now being required to learn basic human decency. Christopher had moved on in every sense. He'd begun dating a civil rights attorney named Rebecca Johnson, a brilliant woman who challenged him intellectually and shared his newfound commitment to social justice. Together, they'd established the Coleman Scholarship Fund, named after Maya and her family, providing full scholarships to students from underrepresented communities pursuing business degrees. The fund started with a donation of $5 million, half of Christopher's liquid assets. He'd told Maya privately that it was the least he could do to make amends for years of silent complicity. The day Maya graduated from Harvard was bright and clear. The ceremony was held outdoors, with hundreds of students in their caps and gowns, proud families filling the seats, and the sense of possibility hanging in the air like promise. Maya's mother sat in the front row, crying tears of joy. Her two younger siblings sat beside her, both now college students themselves thanks to Maya's early financial planning and sacrifices. They wore t-shirts that read, "My sister is a Harvard graduate." As the ceremony progressed, Maya was called to the stage not just to receive her diploma, but to deliver a speech. She'd been selected as the student speaker for the graduate business program, an honor given to only one person per year. Maya stood at the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. She thought about that night at the gala, about the wine stain on her uniform, about Elena's cruel words and crueler smile. She thought about how close she'd come to reacting with anger instead of dignity. She thought about the long road from that humiliation to this moment, and then she spoke. "My fellow graduates, distinguished guests, families, and friends," Maya began, her voice clear and strong. "I stand before you today not just as someone who earned an MBA from Harvard, but as someone who learned the most important lesson of my life while wearing a waitress uniform and being publicly humiliated at a charity gala." The crowd grew quiet, leaning forward. 6 months ago, I experienced explicit racial discrimination. I was judged not by my abilities, my education, or my character, but by the color of my skin and my position serving others. I was insulted, dismissed, and humiliated in front of hundreds of people who did nothing to stop it. Maya paused, letting the words sink in. That night, I had a choice. I could respond with anger, with violence, with the same cruelty that was shown to me. Or I could respond with dignity, documentation, and a commitment to changing the system that allowed that discrimination to happen. I chose the latter, and that choice changed my life. The person who discriminated against me thought she was putting me in my place. She thought she was reminding me that I was less than her, that I didn't belong in her world. What she actually did was give me the evidence, motivation, and opportunity to change not just my own life, but potentially the lives of thousands of people who face similar discrimination every day. Maya's voice grew stronger, more passionate. So here is what I want to say to every person sitting here today, and to everyone who will face injustice in their future. Never let anyone define your worth based on their prejudice. Never let someone else's narrow view of the world limit your potential. And never, ever underestimate the power of maintaining your dignity in the face of cruelty. The best revenge isn't getting even. It's not public humiliation or destruction. The best revenge is becoming so successful, so impactful, so undeniably excellent that you prove every negative assumption wrong. The best revenge is success they never imagined was possible for you. The crowd erupted in applause. Students stood, families cheered, professors nodded in appreciation. Maya continued, her voice now softer but no less powerful. To the person who discriminated against me, thank you. Thank you for showing me exactly the kind of system I needed to fight. Thank you for giving me the motivation to work even harder. Thank you for underestimating me so completely that you handed me the tools for my own success. And to everyone who has ever been judged unfairly, who has ever been told they don't belong, who has ever been underestimated because of their race, their gender, their background, or any other aspect of who they are, you belong here. Your perspective matters. Your voice is important. And the world needs what you have to offer. As Maya finished her speech and returned to her seat, she saw something that made her heart swell. In the back of the audience, partially hidden behind a pillar, stood Christopher Morrison. He was clapping, tears streaming down his face. Beside him was Rebecca, his new partner, also applauding. They caught Maya's eye and nodded, a gesture of respect, gratitude, and shared commitment to a better future. The audio recording of Elena's discrimination became more than just a viral moment. It became a teaching tool. Universities across the country used it in their business ethics classes, their sociology courses, their discussions about implicit bias and systemic racism. Professor Williams at Penn State would play the first 5 minutes, then pause and ask his students, what do you hear in these words? What assumptions are being made? What systems allow this kind of behavior to flourish? The recording became Elena's permanent legacy, but not in the way she'd ever imagined. Her name became synonymous not with elegance or charity or social status, but with prejudice and its consequences. Maya's story, meanwhile, became a different kind of legacy. She was invited to speak at conferences, at corporations, at universities. Her consulting business grew so successful that she hired a team of 5 other consultants, all from diverse backgrounds, all committed to creating real change. She wrote a book about her experience titled The Dignity Dividend: How Maintaining Grace Under Fire Changed Everything. It became required reading in several MBA programs. Most importantly, the policies Maya implemented at Morrison Commercial Properties became a model. Other companies studied what she'd done and adapted it to their own organizations. Slowly, measurably, corporate culture began to shift. It wasn't a revolution. It was something better, sustainable, systematic change. As for Elena, she lived quietly in her mansion, rarely seen in public. The few times she did venture out, to the grocery store, to the bank, people recognized her. Some pointed, some whispered, some took photos. She'd become what she'd always feared most: irrelevant. Not because she was poor, she still had money from the divorce settlement, but because she'd lost the one thing she'd valued most: her social standing, her position, her place in the hierarchy she'd spent her life believing in. The woman who tried to put others in their place had lost her own. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's this. Never underestimate anyone based on their appearance, their position, or your own prejudice. The waitress you dismiss might be a Harvard student. The janitor you ignore might be working on a PhD. The person serving your coffee might be writing a novel, building a business, or changing the world in ways you can't imagine. But more than that, this story teaches us about the power of dignity. Maya could have responded to Elena's cruelty with anger. She could have made a scene, shouted back, quit her job in a rage, and no one would have blamed her. But instead, she maintained her composure. She documented the injustice, and she used that documentation not just for revenge, but for real, lasting change. That's the difference between reaction and response. Reaction is immediate, emotional, satisfying in the moment, but fleeting. Response is strategic, thoughtful, and built to last. Elena learned that cruelty has consequences, that privilege doesn't protect you from the truth, that the world is changing, and people who cling to old prejudices will be left behind. Christopher learned that silence is complicity, that tolerating injustice, even in your own marriage, your own home, makes you part of the problem. But he also learned that it's never too late to change, to make amends, to become part of the solution. And Maya learned that sometimes the worst moments of our lives become the catalysts for our greatest achievements, that the people who try to diminish us often end up elevating us in ways they never intended. That success, real, meaningful success, isn't about revenge, it's about impact. Years later, when interviewers would ask Maya about that night at the gala, she would smile, not with bitterness, but with something that looked a lot like gratitude. That night changed my life, she would say, not because of what happened to me, but because of how I chose to respond to it. Elena Morrison tried to put me in my place. What she actually did was show me exactly where I needed to go and give me the fuel to get there. So in a strange way, I'm grateful. Not for the cruelty, no one should have to experience that, but for the clarity, for the evidence, for the motivation, and for the opportunity to turn one woman's prejudice into thousands of people's opportunity. That's the real lesson of this story, not that good things come to those who wait, not that karma is automatic, but that we have power, the power to choose how we respond to injustice, the power to document and expose discrimination, the power to turn pain into purpose. Elena Morrison thought she was powerful because she was wealthy and well-connected. She learned that true power comes from something deeper: character, competence, and the courage to stand up for what's right. Maya Coleman knew she was powerful because she'd been tested her entire life and never broken. That night at the gala was just one more test, and she passed with dignity, grace, and a recorder in her pocket. In the end, the woman who tried to diminish others was diminished herself, and the woman who maintained her dignity in the face of cruelty became a force for change that touched thousands of lives. That's not just justice, that's poetry. Thank you for following Maya's journey from humiliated waitress to respected change agent, and Elena's fall from privileged socialite to cautionary tale. This story reminds us that in a world where everyone carries a camera and a microphone, cruelty has consequences, and dignity has power. Never underestimate anyone. Never judge people by their position or appearance. And never ever forget that the person you're looking down on today might be the person looking at you from a position of authority tomorrow. The best revenge is success they never imagined possible. And the best life is one lived with dignity, compassion, and the courage to fight for a more just world.